Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Adi Klevit here, the host of the System Simplified podcast, where I feature top founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And today's episode is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group, where we create, document, optimize, and implement processes and procedures so businesses can grow and thrive. And today's guest is Jason Fladlien. Hi, Jason.
Hi, Addie.
Great to have you on this podcast. And before I introduce you and we get started, we're going to have a great conversation, by the way. I'd like to give a big shout out to Jeremy Wise from Rise 25, who introduced us. And Jeremy is the co-founder of Rise 25, which is the company that is producing this podcast. So thank you, Jeremy, for the introduction. All right. So Jason, let me introduce you and then you're going to add to it, okay? Because you have amazing stats. So you've sold over $250 million worth of products to over 150,000 customers in 131 countries. Incredible. And you have a company, your company is Rapid Crush, and you hold the record of all time's biggest launch in the internet marketing space. And Zoom brought you in to teach its user base how to create high converting webinars, which is incredible. And that's what I would love to just hear all about, those high converting webinars. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about processes in terms of like how do they relate to marketing, and probably create a process here around the webinar, because that's what we like to do on this show, is create processes. So, but let's start first of all, anything else that you would like to add in terms of your bio, in terms of how you got started? And there is this thing on your website asking if you were a monk. You know, I have to ask you that question. So tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, it sounds crazy. I mean, hearing the statistics, sometimes I forget some of the things that we've done, because I focus on finding opportunities to serve people that need to be served, who are grateful for any service, and then multiply up from there. And it's amazing where you can start, because I started in a little small town in Iowa. And, I live in LA now, and the population of LA is larger than the whole population of the state of Iowa. And I was in a very difficult situation growing up. I had a rough upbringing. I had parents that were divorced and became absent. One went to prison. And so it was a very challenging, very chaotic childhood. And the interesting thing, and this is why I think it's fun now, I do webinars, but I'd always had this tendency in me to present in front of audiences, because as long as I can remember, I'd be like 6 or 7, 8 years old, and I would be performing raps that I would make up and write and do it in front of audiences, like at local football games and stuff like that. And I always felt very comfortable presenting. I didn't know it was called presenting back then, or performing or what have. There was something about the energy that called to me, and it made sense to me. So I'd always thought that in my life, my mission would be to create and share music with the world. But because of some of the traumas that I had growing up, I was having difficulty even, brushing my teeth on a daily basis, much less trying to build something like a record label. So I had a guy that I worked with that in the music business, he came through, and he was part of this traveling group of monks that preached, and they preached the Hare Krishna philosophy. And because you couldn't be any worse mentally than I was massively depressive at the time. I was agoraphobic, which means I was afraid to go out in public spaces that were open. It's like the opposite of claustrophobia. I had all these anxiety attacks, and it was just a very difficult period of my life. So I was open to this idea of the spiritual side of things, because I ran out of anything else that I could see working for me. And that actually saved my life. And that made me refocus on the music business and really take it serious. And what I discovered, as most people discover in any business, like I always think of the guy who's like, he makes really good food. So somebody says, hey, you should start a restaurant. And so his only market research, his only qualification is he cooks well and somebody told him he should start a restaurant. Next thing you know, he's in the restaurant business, right? That's how I was. I was like, all right, I'm going to launch a successful music career, but I don't know anything about business. And so I learned very quickly, and I was humbled very quickly, that there's the music business and then there's the business of music. And so I started studying business for music purposes, and specifically what called out and resonated with me the most was marketing. And I always thought it would be the marketing of the music, but then I'm like, I like just the marketing even more than anything else I've ever done professionally in my life. So I said, let me see what would happen if I just focused on marketing. That was in 2007. And that's really when I made my first money as a marketer, like purely. And now here we are in 2024. And you've heard the statistics. They still blow my mind, but nonetheless, I set my mind to it. And then, what is really exciting to me, Addie, is in a very processed way. And most marketers and entrepreneurs are very often not process driven. They are creative or whatever. But I literally would sit down and create a whole process map to do webinars with and do marketing, like a flow chart almost. If this, then that. When this occurs, these are the 3 common responses that are most effective generally. So out of these 3, I just have to kind of try to calibrate which one I should say here. Should I do this one or that one? And I built and developed and refined over the last 16 years these webinar strategies, and we've been able to apply them in every industry that we've ever come across.
Wow, that's an amazing story. So first of all, well done. I mean, there's such a inspirational and such a success story. This is fabulous. So let's talk about the webinars. So that was actually my first question to you was, is there an industry that this does not apply to?
Yeah, I find it works in industries where having information is an advantage. And so that's most industries worth being in. Where if somebody knew something that was important to know, then it would help them make a better decision in their life or in their business. And that's where webinars are very useful. A webinar can do 3 things. Okay. Here's everything a webinar could ever do. There's only 3 things. One is it can make a sale directly. And that works really good in business to consumer markets, or in lower ticket offers where the sales cycle is very short. It can move a sale forward. So with corporate clients, for example, oftentimes the webinars set a phone call up. So they book a call and then the call does the closing. Or they can just purely educate. And the first webinar I ever did, actually the first series of webinars I ever did, I calculated it too, Eddie, 24 hours on webinars, like literally a full total day when you added them all up of me doing nothing but training. So before I ever tried to sell or move a sell forward, I first just trained on webinars. And so webinars can be used to train, and that indirectly moves a sale forward, because if you make somebody's life better when they interact with you, the tendency is for them to want to interact with you more. And then they're more open to the idea of investing with you to get the premium version of interaction, whatever that may be.
Absolutely. Do webinars always have to be live?
No. And in a lot of environments, it now makes sense, especially with the innovations and technologies, for them not to be live. Now, I say that with the caveat of I do almost every single one of my webinars live. And there's 2 major reasons for that. One is I built a business model around that. It's kind of like if you think of a musician, some musicians are really good on record, but they're not so great live, right? Some musicians are really great live, but they're only okay on a record in a studio. Some are good at both. I find I am absolutely good live, and so I've built a whole business to take advantage of that. So I do most of mine live for the main reason is it suits my business, but for the second reason is it's a more enjoyable process for me based on how I want to run my business. I love interacting with customers, and I've learned more about webinars doing them live than you ever could automated. But the benefit is then people can listen to podcasts like this, and they don't have to spend 1,000 hours on live webinars working out things to figure out the conclusions to those things. They can take my conclusions and put them into automated webinars. But I have found that if the webinar is created effectively, where it can take somebody who's limited in a way and unlimit them, it doesn't matter so much whether that was done live or whether that was automated or recorded. What what's in the webinar is far more important than how the webinar is distributed.
That makes sense. The content is definitely much more important. So let's talk about the process of creating a webinar. So for our audience that are listening to us right now, and they go, okay, where do I start? So what would you say is the starting point if you decide that you want to create a webinar?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the most common use case of webinars is going to be to sell a product at the end of it. So it's a sales presentation. And I wrote the book called One to Many that breaks down the exact process of how to do this step by step. The reason I call it One to Many is because it's a sales process that you can do in front of many people at the same time, which is
Right.
it's so much more fun than one to me. So it starts with knowing the pieces, and there's 4 distinct pieces to every webinar where you sell product at the end of the webinar, and that's introduction, content, transition, and close. That's how I see it, at least. I used to say intro, content, and close and leave out the transition, but what I've discovered is a lot of people that use webinars, they have difficulty going from I'm showing and training and teaching or coaching or whatever I'm doing during the content phase of the webinar to then I'm making an offer. And so I'm like, this is so important to move from one state to the other state that I think it's, even though a transition is a very short part of a webinar, I think it's critical that we pull that out and we develop process just for that. And so we can build the bridge between the content and the close, and that's the transition. But where it starts, and I think this is far more important than people recognize, is with the introduction. We want to have a webinar that immediately hooks somebody in and draws their attention, calls to the right person, and communicates. I don't care how many webinars you've ever been on in the past, this one is going to be different. And you're like, okay, let's see what's going to go on here. I'm interested in this. So, Addie, there is a myth that I have not much taste for that I hear repeated all the time. I heard this. I had a call right before our podcast here, and the person I was talking with, they said this line that everybody repeats, and I have a strong opinion against. And they say everybody these days has a short attention span. And
Well, first of all, when you hear generalities like that, it's already make you like, where is it? It's a generality, right?
You got it. So, all generalities are oversimplified, including that one, because
Yeah,
that's a
and when
general
somebody
statement.
tells me that, I ask them like, in terms of like, well, do you ever spend hours playing a video game? Oh, yeah. Well,
Exactly.
so you have attention, it's just that you are interested. That's the only difference.
You are 100% correct. So, there's a kernel of truth to that saying. What really is going on is people are less tolerant these days of things that don't call out to them.
Right.
So in the past, they might have tolerated and been and put up with more things that didn't captivate them. But these days, they're much more. They're they don't feel bad anymore closing a video, shutting it down, judging you instantaneously. Those days of friction of, well, I would feel bad if I make a snap decision, those are by and large gone. So it's not that people have shorter attention spans. They are just more discerning where they're going to put their attention to, which is great news for us. Because if we have something worth paying attention to, we will get more attention because it's easier than ever to reach people. When I started doing webinars, we couldn't advertise it on Google because any opt-in page where you say register for this upcoming event, they would ban that from the AdWords network. They would not let you. They call that a doorway page or a bridge page, and they wouldn't even let you advertise it. You couldn't pay Google money to advertise your webinar. Twitter didn't exist. YouTube didn't have an advertising system you could feed through, and neither did Facebook when I started doing webinars. And so if you reached 100,000 people on a piece of content, you were a god in marketing. And these days, I run into friends who have children who are not even 16 yet, who've posted stuff on Instagram and TikTok, who've reached millions and millions of people. So if you have something worth paying attention to, you are going to be rewarded with more attention today, not less. It just also means, though, you better bring it. You better hook it.
Right.
And so that's why it's so important in the introduction of a webinar to start with something that immediately grabs attention. So one of my favorite ways to do it, and I have 7 different ways that I analyze on how I should start a webinar, One of my favorite ways to do it is with what I call a pop quiz. And it doesn't have to be a technical one where you put it in. And in fact, I don't use a software that says, okay, here's the question, you answer it, and then we move on. It's much more casual than that. I'll just basically start the webinar and saying, I have a quiz for you, and the answers to this quiz can depend on your livelihood when it comes to blank, whatever the topic is, right? So it's not just you get a good passing grade. If you get these answers right, they're going to help you in these ways. And here's the first question. And then I give it to them. I say true or false. And then I give them the question. I say, go ahead and type T if it's true in the chat and type F if it's false. And then I let them type, and then I give the answer. And then I do that for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 questions. And then the punchline is the last question sets up the topic for the day that we're going to focus on for the webinar. But I introduced it with an interactive true or false. This is interesting. This is exciting. I don't know what the answer is going to be. The answers I give are valuable, but partial, meaning they have to see the whole webinar to fully understand the purport of those answers. And I've done all this in like 2 minutes. And part of hooking somebody on a webinar is being unique. Most webinars don't start that way. And so
give me an example of a question. I'm so interested. Give me an example of a question.
Yeah, so I have a program where I teach people how to create an information product.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first question that I asked them, I said, true or false, with all this free information out there, it's harder than ever to sell information. And then the answer to that is false. And then I show them the education market has actually increased 17-fold in the last 10 years. So not only with all this free information out there, it's not harder, it's actually easier. And then I give an example, and this is really good on any type of marketing you do. I said, free information is like an itch that the more you scratch it, the more it itches. And then I say, by the end of this webinar presentation, I'm going to show you the right type of information for the people that are seeking free information out, that's giving them the itch that doesn't quite satisfy them. You're going to give them satisfaction. So by the end of the webinar, you're going to discover that. And then I would move on to the second question. So in that particular case for that webinar, the second question was something along the lines of, you have to be really good at marketing to be successful selling information products. And the answer to that, yeah, so the answer to that is true, kind of. So there's a caveat with an asterisk, right? And I say, you need a certain type of marketing. There's a lot of ways you could market an info product. Most of them are complicated, but there's one very specific way in which you could suck at marketing and still be very effective when you market your info product. And I will reveal that to you by the end of the webinar.
Love it. So it hooks them. Okay, good.
Yep.
What's the other question? Another question.
Yeah. So, I mean, and so we can, what you try to do, and this is great because we're analyzing this, is when I write these true false questions, I write them to address the objections that I know my audience is going to have. And so anything you're teaching or selling, it doesn't matter what, people come in with these biases. And oftentimes the people that attend webinars are the people that have the biggest roadblocks. They are so stressed out about the issue that they're willing to join a complete stranger online and spend an hour or 2 with them. I mean, these people are at the end of their rope if they're willing to show up and come to a webinar like that. So people generally that are struggling the most will attend webinars that where solving the problem is very pressing. And so oftentimes these people have excuses of why they can't solve the problem. Every market is like that. So I sit there and think, what are the 3 to 5 to 7 at most major excuses somebody has? So in the info product world, it's all the information is free right now, so nobody's buying it anymore. That's an excuse. I can't market it, so even if I created it, it wouldn't do any good. That's an excuse. Another one is I'm not an expert, so why would anybody buy anything from me? And that's an excuse. Another one is I can't get traffic to my product, so that's an excuse. And so in those 4, 5, 6, 7 questions that I'm asking, what I'm really doing is setting it up to address the objections, the limitations, and the excuses that prevent people from being able to change their behavior. Because all good webinars, what they do is they shift a limiting behavior to one that is no longer limiting. So somebody comes in saying, I want this, but here are the things that hold me back. If your webinar eliminates all the things that hold them back, they will naturally then want to own whatever selling. But until you eliminate the things that stop them, it doesn't matter how many benefits and how many positive outcomes you can show them. They'll still fall back on their excuse. Yes, but ... And so that one hook does everything to help counteract that while being interesting, while being engaging, while being interactive, and all of that. But yeah, it took me like 15 years to figure out the most eloquent way of doing that.
Jason, that's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. But what about getting people to the webinar? That's I think it's a big, like, definitely how to run a webinar is it's important. So you can hook them, you can actually get them to stay to the end and get them to buy at the end and convert.
Yep.
But how about creating the webinar to begin with? Like, the questions that I can see people asking is, how would I going to choose the topic?
Yep.
How should I advertise the webinar? How am I going to get an audience to the webinar?
That's absolutely.
Well, I guess if it's not live, what should I do with the webinar?
Yeah, so there's a list in my head of audiences in descending order of value for a webinar. So the best audience you could ever do a webinar to is existing customers, and not everybody has those. But let's pretend that everybody listening out here, some of them have each of these audiences, and we'll even get down to no audience by the time we're done. So the people that can benefit the most from webinars are those of you who have existing audiences that you can reach with a press of a button. So believe it or not, the number one most valuable audience is an email list, even in 2024. And way beyond the scope of the podcast here today, but there's so much value in an email list. And in most industries, an email list still makes sense to have. And so why this works good is because you can reach people at a click of a button who already are familiar with you to some degree and say, I'm doing this webinar on this date on this topic. You should come to it. So you have to spend the least amount of time getting a whole bunch of people in one place at once, and you know the most of these people because you've already attracted them previously. So it breaks my heart, Addie, when people have a customer list, especially if they have not just an email list, but in that email list, they have people who have bought things from them in the past. It frustrates me that they don't do webinars because that's like sitting on a gold mine and being too lazy to want to dig a couple inches under the dirt. So that is the best audience. If you don't have that, here's the second best audience: somebody else's email list. So we sold $9.8 million of somebody else's product because they had the best product, and we had a pitch, a webinar presentation that we could use to sell it better than even they could sell it. So there's collaborative opportunities where if they have an audience and you could create the presentation, you can either sell your product to their audience and split the money or have some sort of joint venture deal. Or you can even sell their product to their audience, which for those of you just starting out, or those of you at the beginning, there's synergistic opportunities where, like, if you sell their peanut butter and you can add your jelly to it. Right. We're working with a major level client right now. I can't reveal who they are, but last year they did a webinar where they put 1 million people on the webinar live. Like, there's only maybe 12 people on the planet that have ever done that. And we made a deal with them where we're going to help them increase conversion. And as part of that, we're going to put some of our content into their thing, right? So there's collaborative ways where if you don't have the email list, my second list is who does have the email list that would be perfect and how can I make a deal with them? And so then the third way is how can we sell a product or create a thing that would develop an email list? And then on the back of that thing, we can run a webinar. And so some of the best webinars we've ever done have been on the back of selling $5 products, $7 products, $9 products, $1 products, or less effective but easier is giving away something for free. Opt in to get this free resource, this free SOP, this free whatever. And then on the thank you page, we're doing this webinar on this time, on this date, and you should come. And the webinar is an extension of the thing that they bought or the thing that they paid for. So it's the natural progression. But it's the hardest way, although I have clients that have done this and I've trained them on it, is to go completely cold, where you run an advertising to an audience you have no relationship with them, to invite them to attend a webinar free or live or automated, and then try to sell them that way. That can be done. It is the one I recommend you do the least of because it's the most difficult. And even if you're really good at it, it still has a high probability of failure because there are too many variables outside of your control. So it's much better to work a warm audience and work existing customer bases, yours or other people's. And oftentimes you can add a webinar in these models. I can't tell you how many times, Addie, I've went into a client and just say, what do you do with all these leads once they reach the endpoint? So you've tried X, Y, Z, 1, 2, and 3. What happens to the leads then? And they say nothing. Okay, throw an automated webinar at the end of the sequence. You don't lose anything. You might gain something. And oftentimes when they do that, they like the free money it produces, and then they say, "Well, what would happen if we moved it forward in the process?" And then they find moving it forward is more effective than the things that used to be in front of it.
Fascinating. All right, good. So that's how you advertise, and you can. But Jason, when I'm listening to you, I'm thinking also you can have a combination. You can have your own list and somebody else's list. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, I've done it. I've done it to my own customers. I've done it to a list of somebody else, and I done it to a combination. We send invitations to everyone, my clients and the other person's clients or list. And it's just the more the merrier, especially when you find an industry you can collaborate with. Like I've done it with software documentation, like process documentation software, where we create the content and that company provides the platform. Great combination, so you can definitely do that, which is fantastic.
That's actually my favorite way. Our biggest promotions ever have been a collaboration of both our own list and partners lists and cold advertising on top of that.
Absolutely. And then always also, that brings to another point, which we can go down that road, but I want to continue with the webinars, is whatever you do, capture identities and capture emails so you can start building your own list, because you might have, you might not have a list because you're not building it.
I would rather, if I had to give up webinars or my list, I would give up webinars.
Meaning what?
The list is the most valuable thing in any business. And
what would be some good advice on how to build somebody's list?
Yeah, so my favorite way is I like people that pay me money to be put on lists because it makes the clarity on are we getting the right leads or not. I had a client once, they built a list of over 3 million people posting, quirky Instagram motivational sayings. And they came to me and they're like, Jason, oh my God, I got this list. How do we monetize it? And I said to him, a very famous psychologist, by the way, and he was all jacked up. And I said, I bet you anything you couldn't even sell a t-shirt to that list. I said, you should test them out to see if they can even buy from you. Because what I knew about how a list like that was built is if we analyzed the demographics of it, 85% of the list, and we did this later, 85% of the list was from countries that I don't think have credit cards even. So they're easy to reach and they're easy to get false positive responsiveness from, but it's dangerous if you extrapolate that data if you don't understand it. So most of the time, I recommend clients sell something on the front end that somebody could purchase impulsively. So they could look at it and say, this thing solves a problem that I have very specifically and very narrowly, but solves it nonetheless. It's at a marginally small price point. Hey, what do I got to lose if I buy the thing? And then they buy the thing and they can consume it very quickly. That's how we design that. And they say, whoa, in 20 minutes, I bought this thing and I'm already feeling like I got a really good deal. Now we're already setting up the client in advance to be so much more favorable to us. So when we then on the follow-up invite them to a webinar, we have a better clientele that's going to show up to the webinar because we have just engineered a win for them up front. And it's easy to get their contact information. We'll get a full record if they purchase a product. We'll get a shipping address. We'll get a phone number. We'll get all of that stuff versus giving away something for free. We won't get as much of that stuff, and they will give us a second or third or their fourth email that they barely ever check. And so we can attract the wrong people. Now, we should still do free stuff eventually as well, but I like to sell something that is cheap but is of insane value that somebody can buy very quickly and then plan the follow-up to be the webinar. Because that thing on the front end isn't going to really make you any money, but it better sets up the opportunity for you to make money on the back of it with a webinar.
Absolutely. Okay, so now what about the topic? Like, how do we, what are some recommendations on how to choose the good topic?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we need things that solve major pain problems that if the audience keeps the pain, then their life continues to get worse and worse. And ideally, if they solve the problem, then they quit losing money or they put themselves in a position to make money. If we're talking business to business, if we're talking business to consumer, then that's a more indirect comparison. But we have to look at the things that they would be happy to pay to get rid of. Now, that's how I always kind of look at the topics. So, and then we can frame it positively or negatively, but essentially, we look at the biggest pain points in the market and the ones that cost them the most to keep. And then we create a webinar that helps them remove those pain points while simultaneously also getting benefits. And then we try to wrap that all up in a system. So if we look at the earlier example, to a market of digital marketers who are building a business, but there's a gap in their business portfolio where they're not using information products, it's a huge pain point for them.
Right.
And so we're going to give them the relief of, hey, you've wanted to, and this is a really critical point. So this is one that everybody should listen to. We're not trying to turn somebody on who's off. We're taking somebody who's turned on, but the light is dim, and we're brightening that light. So let me unpack that metaphor. I'm not trying to convince somebody who's never created an or I'm not trying to convince somebody who's never thought about an information product and educate them on, here's why information products are so great. I am reaching people who already are sold on the idea of creating an information products, have attempted to do it, and have failed miserably at it. That is the market, that because they're already they're switched on to the idea of creating an information product, but they haven't found a way to finish it. And
Right.
that's the topic that I go after. There are certain markets where we will they generally want to build a business online, but they haven't been set on any specific way. And then I want to articulate a way to that audience that is most accessible to them. So interestingly enough, by the way, in those scenarios to those audiences, I will show them how to start businesses that only make thousands of dollars a month. Not millions of dollars, because they're complete beginners. There's no possible way they're going to be in a position to turn a business on, make $1 million. They don't have the foundation, and they have a lot of limitations. And so those work better, by the way, because it speaks better to the market. But the limitations of somebody starting a business are very different than a business that's at $1 million trying to go to $5 million. And so we want to create webinars that focus in on those pain points that stop them. In the business to like consumer market, if somebody's having trouble falling asleep at night and they've tried all of the traditional ways and they haven't worked, we could create a webinar if we had something that they were unaware of, specifically that they hadn't tried before, and we could reach them, and they'd exhausted the normal ways in which they were attempting to fall asleep and get rid of their insomnia, then we would create a webinar on that. And that would be very powerful. But again, we are almost always going after a pain point. People hate being broke more than they like being rich. And so in the business world, people grow businesses.
Well, the pain point will be like how to maintain your wealth so you don't lose it, right? It's not going to be how to enjoy the money that you have in the bank or your wealth. That could be, but it's probably going to be less
usually carrot and stick, right? But it's more stick than carrot, right? Here's how we can grow your wealth, but here's how we're going to do it in a way that doesn't put you at risk. It's, in any business. So we got to have both. But all my focus on my topic is, what is the biggest difficulty and pain that this market is experiencing? And if I could remove it, then the pain of paying me money will be significantly less than the pain of keeping the problem. And that is the best way that you can go about looking at webinar topics. Where most other people look at it, it's like, oh, wow, let's make this unicorn prettier, and then let's talk to everybody about how great this unicorn is. It's like you're mismatching your market. Your market, here's the way I like to think of it. Nobody goes to a therapist, with very rare exception, to say, man, my life is almost perfect. It's not quite there. Help me out, right? They go to therapy because they can't get out of bed in the morning, and their whole life feels like it's falling apart. That's what the motivation is, to spend time online to train on a topic to try to solve a problem. And so if we can always calibrate to that and make that the center of attention, I might teach you, here's how you can make info products that make you money and make you successful and get you customers. But the foundation of what I will teach on and train on and sell on the webinar is, here are the limitations that prevent you from doing this thing. So big outcome, and here are the issues that get in the way, and here's how we remove those issues. And so the invitation to come to the webinar is this exciting, I want this big outcome, these are the ways that would stop me. And you are promising me that you are going to remove those ways that will stop me.
Absolutely. Do you have any good suggestions for names for webinars?
Yeah, I when in doubt, just do a how-to without frame. So how to X, Y, and Z without normal pain point 1, 2, and 3. Very rarely do I beat that, by the way. I will attempt to try creatively to find different ways of beating that and get very cool about it, but usually 4 out of 5 times that works. And if you want to go extra credit, you add the 2 following elements and you put a timeline around it. So how do X, Y, and Z in certain specific time period without issues 1, 2, and 3. And then the second element is proof. If you can put proof alongside of it, the results you've had for yourself or for clients, or some statistics, or some.
So how to multiply the number of you're missing, never again experience.
Yep.
Lack of new clients, 5x the number of new clients you're getting right now.
Yeah. Subline could be like, I've solved this for 427 clients in the last 6 months, and that's why I'm confident I can solve it for you too. Something like that.
Learn how to do it. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah,
I love it. Okay, good. So then we got into the webinar. We do that, the interest, definitely the attraction of the interest at the beginning. What are your recommendations? So what's the process about content?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I always think in paradigms. So audience comes in with this paradigm, and we need to shift the paradigm into the one that would put them in the most receptive state to either buy or move forward in the sales process. And so somebody comes in with a paradigm saying, I can do X, and that's my limitation. And what we're going to do is we're going to change the paradigm to where their limitation no longer exists. And that's how I build all of my content. So when we taught people how to use Amazon in their business to grow their e-commerce business, the biggest limitation that they had is, I don't know what product to sell. And so their paradigm coming in was, I don't know what product to sell, because it's tough to know if I'm going to spend all this money and time on packaging and on inventory up front. I don't know if it's a good investment. How do I know if it goes live on Amazon, if people are going to be able to find it and buy it? And I'm really scared to try it out. I want to try it out, but there's so much risk involved that I'm freaked out. So I'll listen to you, but it's unlikely that I'm actually going to move forward and start an Amazon business. And the way we would shift that paradigm is we would show them almost with X-ray vision throughout how to know with great certainty whether a product would be profitable or not before you ever even attempted to put it on Amazon. And so the whole content in the webinar is focused just around that. And then I say, what insights and what knowledge do they need to allow that paradigm shift to occur? And then that's how I train on the content. So one of the things that we would talk about is, if you're launching your own version of the product, you can't really do market research on it. So if there are 15 other silicone spatulas and they're all selling over $15,000 a month, you can't say, well, if I also have a silicone spatula, then I will also sell that. Because what's different? Well, what's different is they're already established and you're not. What's different is they have 6,272 reviews, and your mother hasn't even reviewed your product yet, so you don't have any reviews. Right. And they did it in a different time period. Yesterday's results may not be tomorrow's results. Now, by the way, Addie, other presenters are afraid to bring up these issues because they're afraid if we cast doubt on the model whatsoever, then customers will run for the hills. I found the opposite to be true. If we shine the light on these limitations, as long as we can solve them or work around them, it's better to bring them up and lay them on the table and then address them. And so that's what we do.
Well, you have to, because then people are going to identify with you, right?
That's
so
right.
When you say paradigm, you mean basically the philosophical framework of somebody, or like, what do they think? Like they think and everything that they formulated, all the ideas that they formulated around it.
Yep.
So one way is to actually bring it to the open and discuss those problems or those frameworks or those philosophies.
That's
so
right.
Then they can be examined, looked at, and you can achieve that shift in viewpoint.
Yeah, we hope that they are going to change their view, because unless they change their view, it's unlikely they're going to buy whatever we sell at the end.
Or maybe they want to change view, they don't know how, and then they go to you because that's what you're going to buy.
Yeah, they typically come in saying, I doubt this will work, but on the off chance it does work, I will give you my attention. But I ain't gonna give you my money, but I will give you my attention. And then it's my job to show them how, despite their low self-esteem and despite their supposed shortcomings and issues that have gotten in the way in the past, that somehow this time will be different. And that's really my paradigm personally on how I view that content section of what do I need to show so they can see things from a better, more empowering perspective. That's also based in reality, by the way. So it's not crazy. It's just oftentimes when people are stuck, it's because of some perceived limitation that they have in their thinking and in their feeling. And so, and this is a legitimate concern. People come in and say, Jason, I've tried to do this thing 99 different ways in the past from 99 different people who've taught me 99 different strategies, and I'm still no better off than I was on the first one. So why would it be different the 100th time? And that is a valid, 100% valid paradigm. But the thing of it is if you quit after the 99th time, then you guarantee you'll never get better at it. So that's not really a solution. And an alternative to consider is those 99 times can be invested, and that can be the difference, is the experience of the 99 times prior, if put together in the proper ways, could be the difference. And so if you didn't fail 99 times first, then you couldn't have succeeded on the 100th time. And maybe that's the paradigm shift that I could create. Or I could use a different paradigm shift where the best thing about the past is that it's over with. You don't have to have the past dictate your future. So regardless of what has happened in the past, that doesn't mean that you have to live based on past results. Maybe they don't matter, and maybe this is what matters instead. And then maybe I can build a paradigm around that. So I'm always looking at the content on what's the existing paradigm and what do I think is the best strategy to create a new, more empowering paradigm in its place. And oftentimes here is what they all have in common from a process perspective is the least amount of change I have to make to the customer, the better it will be. And I'll give you an example of how I think about this strategically. Say I wanted you to make more money playing poker. I could train you on game theory and bluffing and the mathematical probabilities of which hands you should play, and that would be really hard. Or I could strategically find tables for you to sit at with really bad poker players who love to bet lots of money and don't care if they lose it all. And you could stay exactly the same as a poker player, your skill set, or maybe we work on it just a little bit. But what changes is the environment that we put you in. So oftentimes the paradigms that I look for is I'm not going to make you a faster racer. I'm just going to have you run races against people that are a lot slower than you. And all of my biggest webinars have that in common, where we change as little of the user as possible. We change the circumstances around how they approach it, and now they get a different result.
I love it. I think it's amazing. I think one thing, Jason, that really struck me about you is that, you disagree. You don't agree with the norm. You don't agree with what people think or do. I mean, I guess that's what you are referring to in terms of the paradigm, right? It's that philosophical, again, it's the philosophical view that, or theoretical framework that you have with the theories, with the laws, with the ideas. So you have your own, and you don't hear what everybody says, that people don't have attention, or the past was like this. So instead of going, oh yeah, the past was like this, or the future, we go like, no, this is the past. Now we're going to create our own future. So that those shifts and refusing to accept those fixed ideas is really, really important.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah. So, okay, so we have content, and after, what comes after content in the webinar?
Yeah, the transition. So, I have taught many of them, but I will tell you the one that people, out of everyone I taught, the one that they use over and over again. And it's not applicable in every case, but it's applicable in most cases. We call it the two choices transition, where essentially after you've done all of your training on the content portion of your webinar, you say, now we're left with two choices. I could either let you go at it alone and hope and pray on your own with what we've talked about today, that would be sufficient and it would be enough to help you with XYZ. And if that was the only choice that we had, it would be an ideal choice to pursue. It'd be worthy and a noble cause for you to go at it alone. However, what if there was a second choice? What if we could do this together? What if I could have an active participation in your outcome? What if I had a responsibility to your success? So I wouldn't just merely be a cheerleader on the side, rooting you on, hoping and praying that you could make it work, but we would be doing this collaboratively together. How would that sound to you? And they'd be like, oh my God, that would sound great. And I go, that's the choice that we chose today. And the way that that choice shows up is with this program or whatever the case may be. So we juxtapose. Yeah. We juxtapose the two choices. You can either do it without resources and, hey, save money. Wow, cool, right? Or you could spend money and get all of this stuff, and it's up to you to choose. And now whatever we're offering is framed in the positive light that it should be framed in. Like, we are selling products so you don't have to cut your own hair. You don't have to sew your own clothes. You don't have to walk from Los Angeles to New York.
You don't have to document your own processes and procedures.
You got it. And you're
okay,
more
so
than
that's a
welcome
transition, and then what comes after that?
Yeah, and then we introduced the offer, right? So it's with great pleasure that I introduced to you whatever the product is. Now, here's a little tip, and this is something a lot of people aren't aware of. So the client that I just did, so just so people can understand, and this sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud, but it is what it is. I charge $25,000 for a day if I do consulting. And so clients will pay me, and almost never do I go to the client. Almost all of my clients come to me. So they usually fly in and meet me here locally. However, if the client is big enough, I will go to the client. So I just did this on Monday. It's Wednesday while we're recording this right now. So 2 days ago, I flew in with this client. They paid me $25,000 for the day. And I sat down with them and I showed them this technique, and they're some of the best in the world at what they do. And they did not know this, but when they understood this changed everything for them. They got so excited because they're going to put over 1 million people through this funnel this year, and they typically convert at 2%. And they think that this will get them to 4%. So if they were going to sell $20 million of product before, which is what they projected, they may sell $40 million now. And here's what I taught them, and here's what I do in almost all of my presentations, is I tell the bare minimum of what I feel I need to do in order to ask for the sale. So it's usually 3 to 5 minutes. I introduce the product. I explain high level, 50,000-foot view, what it's about, who it's intended for, why it's amazing, what it solves for, how it's delivered. And that usually will only take me 3 to 4 minutes at most. And then I will go into the investment for the offer, whatever it is. And what we will do there 9 times out of 10 is an anchor of price. So if I was selling my webinar services, or if I was selling a webinar training program that I'd created, the price anchoring could be, I have made over $250 million with this myself. I have many clients that have made $100 million or even $10 million on the lower end that I've worked with together with these processes. So they've been worth millions to clients. We've done training events that people pay $50,000 or more to attend. I'm $25,000 for a day. So something like this would be an absolute steal at $10,000. Even at $5,000, it would be an unbelievable bargain. That's why if you act fast enough and get it for just $19.97, you're going to get quite the special deal when you go to example.com/yes and get signed up, something like that, right? So that's a price anchor. So you do 3 to 4 minutes of what you're selling high level, you anchor it to the real value of it, and then you juxtapose that to the investment that it would take to acquire your product or service, and then you do a call to action. Now, here's what's going to happen, because this always happens. So once upon a time in about 2022, we did a launch that did $57.9 million in 226 days. And that meant from day one, I took the call, Zoom meeting, where I was proposed an idea and I partnered with a company. And 225 days after that day, we had collected $57.9 million in revenue. And that promotion, we had 200,000-ish business owners opt into it. A little bit more than 200,000, but I don't remember the exact number. But I do remember this one number very vividly. Out of everybody that opted into 6.83% purchase, and this is a $3,500 product, which is a phenomenal conversion rate. 6.83%, absolutely great. However, that means 93% of people didn't buy. So in group selling, not one-to-one, but in group selling, most people are going to tell you no. They just will. Almost everybody will. So the philosophy here is let's get a no out of the way as fast as possible because somebody's going to say no anyway. So better they say no with the minimum amount of information needed to say no. So anything we do after that will only increase the value and therefore move them from a no to a yes, be more likely.
It's also a face saver for them because they said no to something that they might not have understood, quote unquote. But now that they have more, and they can say, oh, I didn't get it. That's what you meant. But if this is the case, then I will do it.
You are 100% correct. It also puts them in the driver's seat. They feel in control. You didn't get me to say yes. I chose to say yes. And I'm okay with however you want to justify in giving me money, but
that makes total
most people are
sense.
it's safe to say no.
So that is the follow-up, basically, what you're saying.
But so on the same webinar, I will show them only 10% of the full value of the offer, ask for their money. They'll most likely say no. And then I'll show them, in addition to what I just went over with you, we also have this. So it's either,
so
it
you
could
do
be
it
another,
still on the webinar. You continue.
still on the webinar. Yep. So content section generally will go 45 to 60 minutes. Introduction will typically go 5 to 15 minutes, depending on topic, depending on audience sophistication, depending on price point that you're going to inevitably sell at. If you're selling product at the end of the webinar, if you're booking a phone call, completely different set of metrics. But for this particular use case, that's what that looks like. And so when we start to go into the close, we're 5 minutes in, we've asked for the order, and they've most likely say no. But I'm going to have at least 20 more minutes of stuff that I'm going to cover in most instances of things they also get that they weren't aware of when they initially said no. These can be bonuses, or they can be components of the offer. They can be additional things related to the offer that we hadn't covered yet, because the psychology goes, I said no when I thought it was this. And so the price is up here and the value is down here. But now you add this. And then it starts to be like a scale that tips in the other direction. And so we end on value. Every other webinar that I've studied before I've really taught this, they end on price. Where would you want your customers focused at the end of the day? On price or on value? So we end on value. So we will do 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 different things that we add to it to increase the value of it. And that will, more than anything, help the webinar succeed. And then finally, and this is why I like to do them live, if you're doing them live, even then, after an hour and a half on the webinar, you'll still have people on that are interested in buying. They want to buy. They haven't bought yet, but they have concerns and questions. And so I will stay on with them and I will work through those concerns and questions. I'm out of slides by now, so I don't have any more slides. So I just have one slide with a call to action where they can go to sign up in everything that they get. So we call that the call to action slide. And then I just sit there and I answer questions until one of two things happen. One, I run out of energy, or two, I run out of questions. And I have made more money on hour 3 or hour 4 or hour 5 of a webinar just handling questions than I've made at any other point in a webinar in my career. And here's the best news of all. I've taken the insights that I've learned working through these questions and reshaped webinars, hooks, invitations, introductions, parts of the content, parts of the close, based upon that feedback that I'm getting in the moment when I'm doing the webinar.
Wow, so insightful. We're getting to the end of the podcast, but I'm curious. Yep. Do you do also follow-up after that? Like, you ended the webinar, what do you do in terms of follow-up?
Absolutely. So for us, more money comes from the follow-up than it comes from the webinar itself. Okay. A mistake I see happening in a lot of businesses is they front load the webinar. So they'll do something like the following: fast action bonus. If you're one of the first 25 to sign up, you also get X. I am not a fan of that in most instances because I'm a fan of campaigns. That's how I calculate how much did the campaign make, not how much the webinar made. Because we can front load sales on the webinar, but not see anything on the follow-up. So we hook promotions to end at a certain day, typically 3 to 5 days after the webinar is over with. So the special offer we make on the webinar, and you should never do a webinar without something about the offer being special, whether it's a discount in price or whether it's an addition of some sort of value. I prefer both. You get extra bonuses and you get a discount, but it expires because it ain't special if it's always available. It expires in the future and you give them 3 to 5 days. Because for most major purchases, you know where most of the selling occurs? It occurs when they try to go to sleep at night and they can't quit thinking about what you said earlier that day. And then they wake up tomorrow and they've sold themselves better than you could have ever sold them. And so we like the follow-up. The follow-up is geared to get them to go back and consume the recording and the replay of the webinar you just did. And the emails drive that with multiple different perspectives for them to try on as they go back and look through the webinar. And then the urgency that hits on the last day when the offer expires is typically where we see a majority of sales, because now it's time to either say yes or say no. And the finality of the thing helps people make a decision. Whereas most people, if you leave them alone, they'll stay on maybe forever. Maybe is the worst place you can leave people.
You have to press and create. Okay, so what is the webinar? So that it consists of follow-up emails.
Yep.
What else?
I mean, the way we do it, which is unique and different and insane, I get it, but this is what we do is oftentimes we will do a second webinar, or if not a second webinar, we will do what we call an objection handling webinar, where we will literally say, okay, listen, we're running out of time. You got to decide whether this makes sense for you or not. So why don't you get on this webinar with me? Now, we're not going to do any training, any coaching, or anything related to this topic. We're just literally going to answer questions that you have related to this, specifically questions that are going to help you make a no decision or a yes decision. And spare my feelings. Be very blunt with me and be direct and aggressive if you must be, because I just need to know, because you have to tell me what is on your mind to help you decide what you should do, if you should say yes or if you should say no. So come to this webinar and we'll work it out together. And that's oftentimes part of our follow-up. And we'll sit on a call for another hour, 2, 3, or 4 and work through. And I will tell you,
it's a group call, so different people are going.
Yeah. Oftentimes it's the same people, but sometimes it's new people too. Here's what it does that a lot of people don't get. They see the obvious thing it does, which is, you're dealing with objections, you're closing sales, so on and so forth. Sure, it does that. That's great. But here's what it really does. It shows your audience your commitment and dedication to serve them. That's what it really does. And people buy from you based upon the demonstration of how much you care, not how much you tell them you care. And they say, whoa, everybody else in this market who I've tried to have solve the problem with me gave up on me, and this person still hasn't given up on me yet. So if I'm going to do business with anyone, it is going to be this person. So it's not necessarily any particular way you handled an objection or did it close. That could help a little bit. Mostly it's your commitment of showing your audience how dedicated you are, that if they are the right person, you want to serve them. And if they are not the right person, you absolutely don't want to do business with them. But the devil's in the details. How do you know if you're the right person or not? And we got to figure that out together. So that's part of our follow-up sequence that really helps us set some of the numbers that we've set.
Wow. Jason, this has been such an amazing conversation. I mean, I learned so much, and I'm definitely going to use a lot of it for sure. So if our audience want to know more about you and reach out to you, get some help from you, what is the best way to contact you?
The best way, get my book on Amazon. So it's called One to Many. So just go to Amazon and purchase it. There's like a Kindle for $10. That will show you more than anything some of the specifics of what we taught today. If you need to contact me personally, you can go to my website, jasonfladlien.com, and reach out to me there.
Love it. Great. Well, Jason, thank you so much for being a guest on this podcast and sharing your knowledge. Thank you.
Oh, you are most welcome.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.